He had expected the usual court proceedings, not this. He wasn't prepared to face the woman he had arrested, especially not in this setting. He glanced around the room, hoping for some sort of rescue, but the eyes of everyone present were locked on him. The judge, a stern man with decades of experience, looked at him expectantly. The other lawyers, the clerks, even the bailiffs, seemed to be waiting for his next move. Rachel, however, remained calm. She sat there, poised and confident, her gaze never leaving the officer. Her expression betrayed nothing, no anger, no frustration, just a quiet intensity. It was almost as if she was daring him to make the next move, forcing him to face the consequences of his actions. But the officer had no clue what those consequences might be. Was she going to make an example out of him? Would she press charges for false arrest or even misconduct? Or was this some kind of power play, a way for her to remind everyone who was truly in charge? The possibilities raced through his mind, but none of them offered any comfort. Rachel wasn't the only one in the room who seemed to have an agenda. The defense attorney, who had been sitting quietly until now, leaned forward, his eyes flicking between the officer and Rachel. He seemed to be calculating something, weighing the situation in his mind. The officer caught the faintest smirk on the lawyer's face, a look that told him he was aware of the underlying tension. It was clear that whatever happened next, this wouldn't be a simple court case. It was personal now. The officer knew the stakes were high. His reputation was on the line, and depending on how Rachel handled things, his career might be too. But there was more at play here than just one bad arrest. The system itself was under a microscope, and the growing tension in the rooms seemed to reflect something deeper, a mistrust between law enforcement and the legal system, a divide that could no longer be ignored. Rachel, as always, was a symbol of the law's power. But the officer's mind wandered to a deeper question. Had he been just another pawn in a system that sometimes worked against the very people it was supposed to protect? Had he been too quick to make assumptions, too eager to enforce the rules without questioning who was truly in control? The silence in the room was suffocating as the officer's fate hung in the balance. Would Rachel's response to his mistake lead to a greater confrontation between them, or would it expose even bigger flaws in the system they both served? And how much was she willing to risk to make sure the truth came out? As the gavel tapped once again, Rachel's next words would reveal more than anyone could anticipate. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, thickening with every second that passed. The officer's mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. He was no longer in control of the situation. He had always believed that the law was black and white, a clear-cut set of rules to follow. But now, standing before the chief prosecutor, everything felt blurred. The sharp eyes of Rachel Martinez were like lasers, cutting through any remaining sense of certainty he had left. The judge, sensing the rising tension, slammed his gavel on the desk. Order in the court. He barked, his voice echoing off the walls. It did little to break the suffocating silence. The officer shifted uneasily on his feet, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight. He knew this moment would define his career. The world seemed to slow down as he waited for Rachel to speak, to give her next move, but she simply watched him, her expression unreadable. Then finally, her voice broke the silence again, but it wasn't what he expected. "Officer Hayes," she said, her tone smooth, but laced with something that made his stomach tighten. "You made an arrest. You acted on a warrant you thought was valid. But here's the thing." She paused, allowing the words to hang in the air, hanging like a weight over him. "The warrant was never issued. It was a clerical error, a mistake that shouldn't have happened in the first place." The officer's heart skipped a beat. A clerical error. He couldn't believe it. If that was true, then what had he done? Was he really guilty of arresting her on a mistake that had been made behind the scenes? And if Rachel Martinez, of all people, was caught in such a mess, what would this mean for the system as a whole? He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize or defend himself, but no words came out. Rachel was not finished. She stood up now, her gaze never leaving his, and turned toward the judge. The room was hanging on every word she was about to say. Your Honor. But still, neither Dawson or the man in the suit explained further. It was as if they were toying with him, pushing him closer to the edge. Every second felt like it would be his last, like any word he said or move he made could send everything crashing down. Daniels had no idea what to expect next, but one thing was certain: whatever came next, his life as he knew it was about to change forever. Daniels's mind raced as Dawson's cryptic words lingered in the air, thick with tension. He had been around long enough to know when something was wrong, when things weren't adding up. But nothing in his years of service had prepared him for this. Every instinct told him to be cautious, to avoid making any sudden moves. But the growing suspicion gnawed at him. Before he could piece together his thoughts, Dawson broke the silence. Officer Daniels, you've done good work, but the time has come for you to make a decision. His voice was eerily calm, almost rehearsed. You're being watched because you're valuable. You've got potential. Daniels's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about his career. This was about his future, his life. He had worked hard to earn his place on the force, to make sure he stayed on the right side of things. But now Dawson was offering him a choice, one he hadn't expected. Was he being recruited? Or was this some kind of test? He looked toward the man in the suit, who stood silently by, watching him intently. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. You can either walk away from this, keep doing your job, stay clean, Dawson continued, or you can join us. Help us clean up the mess. His words hung heavy in the air, but Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something they weren't telling him. Daniels swallowed hard, his mind clouded with uncertainty. He had always followed the rules, always believed in the system, but now it felt like everything was being called into question. Was he being lured into something he didn't fully understand? As Daniels opened his mouth to respond, the man in the suit suddenly stepped forward, his voice sharp and cutting through the tension. The thing is, Officer Daniels, he said, his tone changing, we're not asking you to join us. We're giving you an ultimatum. The words hit him like a slap. Ultimatum. What did that even mean? Dawson gave the man a small nod, as if confirming something, before turning his full attention back to Daniels. The cold smile on his face sent a chill down Daniels' spine. We know what you've been up to, Daniels. We had our eyes on you for a while. Everything inside Daniels seemed to freeze, his hands clenched into fists. Had they been watching him all along? How long had this been in the works? He thought back to every moment, every decision, trying to piece together what he had done wrong. And then, just as the weight of the situation threatened to collapse on him, the final twist came. The man in the suit pulled out a file and handed it to Dawson, who flipped it open casually. Your mistake, officer, Dawson said with a hint of satisfaction, was thinking you were the only one with a clean record. Daniels' breath caught in his throat as he looked down at the file. There, in black and white, was a copy of his own background check. But there was something else. A list of names, a list of officers he had known. Names he had trusted, names he had worked with, all marked with red flags, all under investigation by internal affairs. Suddenly, it all made sense. He wasn't the one under investigation, he was the bait. The system had set him up, and the people he had trusted were the ones who had been pulling the strings. Daniels' stomach churned as he realized the truth. He had been used, manipulated into playing a part in something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. He looked up at Dawson and the man in the suit, his heart racing, his mind still reeling. So this was all a setup, he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. Dawson's smile widened. Welcome to the game, Daniels. Dawson's gaze seemed to pierce through him, his eyes scanning him closely, almost as if he was studying his every move. You ever been involved in any controversial situations, Officer Daniels? His words were slow, measured, as though he was trying to gauge Daniels' reaction. The question hit Daniels like a ton of bricks. Was this some kind of interrogation? Was Dawson looking for an excuse to dig into his past? Daniels swallowed hard, shaking his head. "No, sir. I've always kept things clean. Nothing like that." Dawson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply looked at Daniels with a gaze that felt like it was reading him, peeling back his layers. The longer the silence stretched, the more Daniels felt the weight of the man's scrutiny. Then, just as Daniels thought he might break under the pressure, Dawson gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was cold, but it wasn't mocking. It was as if Dawson was amused by the unease he had planted. "Good," he said softly, "because things can get messy when people start making mistakes." Daniels blinked, caught off guard by the statement. What was he trying to say? Was Dawson implying something about his past? Or was this just some mind game designed to rattle him? Before Daniels could respond, Dawson slowly leaned back in his seat, his posture suddenly more relaxed, but the tension didn't leave the air. Instead, it shifted, like something was on the verge of snapping. Daniels' eyes darted nervously toward the rearview mirror, half expecting to see backup pulling up, but the street remained eerily quiet. Dawson's voice sliced through the silence again, this time with a sudden sharpness. "You know, Officer Daniels, there are some people in this town who think they can get away with things. But internal affairs, we don't miss much." The words hung in the air, the implication impossible to ignore. What was Dawson hinting at? And why did it feel like Daniels was the one being scrutinized, not the other way around? The suspense was unbearable now. Daniels could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The longer he stayed, the more he realized this wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about something much bigger, something that could change everything. And as the seconds ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that Dawson was about to reveal something that would alter the course of his life forever. But what? Daniels felt the weight of Dawson's words settle in his chest. Internal affairs didn't miss much. What was that supposed to mean? A chill crept up his spine, the idea that he could be under some kind of investigation making him sick to his stomach. He had always tried to keep his record clean, his conduct exemplary. So why did Dawson's cryptic words feel like a countdown to something terrible? As the tension thickened, Daniels caught the flash of movement in his peripheral vision, something coming toward him. His heart skipped a beat. He turned instinctively toward the sound, just as a second car pulled into the parking lot behind him. At first, he assumed it was just another routine passerby, but something about the car felt off. The engine was too quiet. The figure inside was too still. His breath caught as he realized this wasn't just any civilian car. The door opened slowly, and out stepped a man in a dark suit. His posture was rigid, purposeful. He didn't look like an average citizen. Daniels stiffened, instinctively reaching for his radio, but before he could say a word, Dawson's voice interrupted. "Don't worry about him." Daniels' mind was spinning. Who was this new person? Was he part of internal affairs too? Or was he some kind of higher-up? Dawson's calm assurance only made the situation more confusing. And then, as if to seal the mounting tension, the man in the suit began to walk toward them with purpose, his steps measured and deliberate. "Everything all right here?" the man in the suit asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes scanning the scene with a sharpness that made Daniels feel exposed. Dawson turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the newcomer. "Yeah, we're fine," he replied, his voice cool, but carrying an undercurrent of something Daniels couldn't quite place. He didn't understand it. Why was Dawson acting so casual? Was this man with Dawson? Or was he some unknown factor in this increasingly bizarre situation? The man in the suit said nothing more, just stood by waiting. The air felt thick with unspoken tension as Daniels tried to make sense of what was happening. He had never been in a situation like this, one that felt so layered, so completely out of his control. Then Dawson shifted in his seat, breaking the silence. "You know, Daniels," he said casually, "this isn't the first time you've crossed paths with us. Not the first time we've been watching."